a little disclaimer first. English is not my first language, which is why some of my pronunciations might be awkward or stunted or stilted or whatever else. I will be reacting to the book probably after each chapter or before the new chapter, something like that. As we go, we'll see. I am also not at all fluent in Tolkien imaginable languages. So there might be some difficulty with pronouncing his names as well, especially Kuzdul, since he doesn't really have the appendix regarding that. But I'll do my best. I'll do my best. I know at least some of the rules that he states. But yeah, don't mind the Troin instead of Trine or Train. That is how I believe it should be pronounced. I will also try to sing the songs that I know, or at least imitate, but I do not know as many songs as I would like to. Other than that, I do have my own edition of The Hobbit right next to me, like the physical copy, and the one that you see on screen is not the same one, which is why we'll start with a preface that is not here. In the meanwhile, you're going to see this beautiful, beautiful stream. Hopefully it is on screen now. I think it is. It should be. Yes. This is courtesy of Buhanki, whose Telegram channel you can see down there. So I think there's that. It should be all. Hopefully you can hear me. So, as I said, we're starting with a preface. In the meantime, I will just show you the book cover, I suppose, because I don't really have anything else to show you while I'm reading it. It's not in the PDF. So, The Hobbit was first published on the 21st of September 1937. My father said several times that he had a clear recollection of writing the opening sentence of The Hobbit long after, in a letter written to W.H. Auden in 1955, he said, "All I remember about the start of The Hobbit is sitting correcting school certificate papers in the everlasting weariness of that annual task forced on impecunious academics with children. On a blank leaf I scrawled, 'In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit.' I did not and do not know why. I did nothing about it for a long time, and for some years I got no further than the production of Thror's map. But it became The Hobbit in the early 1930s. Let me see. Shall it be this? Technical issues, I suppose. Do you want me to do this? I'll just show this screen here. Right, moving on. But when he wrote that first sentence, not known in so many languages, in Hole or in der Erde da lebte in Hobbit, I will not try to read this next part because I am not familiar with Greek or Dutch or German or whatever else is used here, that he did not remember. My brother Michael recorded long after his recollection of the evenings when my father would stand with his back to the fire in his small study of the house in North Oxford, the 22nd Northmoor Road, and tell stories to my brothers and me. And he said that he remembered with perfect clarity the occasion when my father said that he was going to start telling us a long story about a small being with furry feet and asked us what he could be called. Then, answering himself, said, "I think we'll call him a hobbit." Since my family moved from that house at the beginning of 1930, and since my brother preserves stories of his own, In imitation of The Hobbit, which he had dated 1929, he was convinced that The Hobbit began at any rate no later than that year. His opinion was that my father had written the opening sentence in a hole in the ground where lived a hobbit in the summer before he began telling us the story, and that he repeated those opening words as if he had invented them on the spur of the moment. He also remembered that I, then between 4 and 5 years old, was greatly concerned with petty consistency as the story unfolded, and that on one occasion I interrupted, "Last time you said Bilbo's front door was blue, and you said Thorin had a golden tassel on his hood. But you've just said that Bilbo's front door was green, and the tassel on Thorin's hood was silver." At which point my father muttered, "Damn the boy," and then strode across the room to his desk to make a note. Whether these memories were accurate in every respect or not, it may well be that the first scrolled copy, which did not reach beyond the first chapter, and of which 3 leaves survive, belonged to that time. In December 1937, 2 months after the publication, I wrote to Father Christmas and gave The Hobbit a vigorous puff, asking him if he knew it and proposing it to him as an idea for Christmas presents. I informed him of the history of the book as I recollected it. He wrote it ages ago and read it to John, Michael, and me in our winter reads after tea in the evening. But the ending chapters were rather roughly done and not typed out at all. He finished it about a year ago and lent it to someone to read. She passed it on to a person in Messrs. George Allen and Unwid Ltd. Publishing Service, and after a great deal of communication they brought it out at 7/6. It is my favourite book. The someone was Elaine Griffiths and the person was Susan Dagnall. The story is told together with a report of the book written by Raina Unwin, then 10 years old, in Humphrey Carpenter's biography, pages 239 to 41. It seems that the greater part of the story was in written form by the winter of 1932, when it was read by C.S. Lewis, but then it went no further than the death of Smaug, and it was not until 1936 that the ending chapters were written. During those years, my father was engrossed in the Silmarillion, the myths and legends of what afterwards became the First Age of the World, or the Elder Days, already then with long roots in his imagination and indeed in his writing. A text of the Silmarillion, made in all probability in 1930, was followed by another version, richer and more developed, which was interrupted near its end when demands for a sequel to The Hobbit led him to put it aside and write a new story about hobbits in December 1937. Into that world, as he said, Mr. Baggins strayed, or as he expressed it in a letter written in 1964, "By the time The Hobbit appeared, this matter of the elder days was in coherent form. The Hobbit was not intended to have anything to do with it. I had the habit, while my children were still young, of inventing and telling orally, sometimes of writing down children's stories for their private amusement. The Hobbit was intended to be one of them. It had no necessary connection with mythology, but naturally became attracted towards this dominant construction in my mind, causing the tale to become larger and more heroic as it proceeded. This attraction exerted by the matter of the elder days is shown also in his paintings and drawings from those years. A notable example is the pencil and ink picture of Mirkwood in chapter 8, Flies and Spiders, which is restored to The Hobbit in this edition, in the edition that I'm holding in my hands, not the one that you see on screen in PDF form. It appeared in the first British and American editions, but was then dropped. This was redrawn from and closely modelled on an earlier painting depicting a still more evil forest, Tar na Fuin. It illustrated a story from the Silmarillion, the tale of Thorin, and showed the encounter of the elves Beleg and Gwyndor, small figures among the roots of the great tree in the centre. In the Mirkwood version, the elves are gone, and instead there is a large spider and a larger number of mushrooms. In this case, my father was prepared long after to give even a third application to the scene, writing on the painting the caption Fangorn Forest, Treebeard's Forest in The Lord of the Rings. He let it be used as an illustration in the J.R.R. Tolkien calendar, 1974, and with this caption, it is reproduced in the book J.R.R. Tolkien Artist and Illustrator, number 54. The elves Beleg and Gwyndor were now to be interpreted as the hobbits, Pippin and Merry, lost in Fangorn, but Beleg has his great sword and is wearing shoes. My father presumably hoped that this would not be noticed, since the figures are very small, or else did not mind it was. He intended the black and white version, Mirkwood, to be the first end paper of The Hobbit, and Thror's map to be placed in Chapter 1, or in Chapter 3, where Elrond first observed the secret runes. The moon runes were originally to appear on the reverse of the map, and the first carefully drawn form of the map, which closely followed the original sketch reproduced here. The caption was Thror's map, copied by B. Beggins. 4 moon runes hold up to a light. It was objected by Charles Firth of Ellen and Unwin that readers would just turn over instead of looking at them through the page as they should. We are trying a rather more cunning method of letting the runes be both there and not there, he wrote in January 1937. My father replied that he was looking forward to finding out your method of reproducing the magic runes, but later in that month he learned that the magic was left out through a misunderstanding on the part of the blockmaker. He then drew the runes in reverse, so that when printed they would read the right way round, held up to the light. But I leave this to the production department, hoping nonetheless that it will not be necessary to put the magic runes on the face of the chart, which rather spoils it, unless your reference to magic refers to something magical. The question of costs seemed to have settled the matter. As was explained to him, the book had to be modestly priced, and there was no margin for any illustration, but when you sent us these drawings, wrote Susan Dagnall, they were so charming that we could not but insert them, though economically it was quite wrong to do so. Let the production department do as it will with the chart, Thror's map, my father wrote, when the decision was taken to make it an end paper. I am very grateful to it, so that it is how it has always appeared, but it seems that he had sent in 2 copies of the moon runes, and those that were printed were not the better drawn runes he had substituted. Those now shown are ill done and not quite upright. This is only a sample of what extremely courteous but slightly desperate correspondence of half a century ago, more than that now, letters crossed and influenza struck at blockmaker, printed and production department alike, and at the most inopportune moments. The upper border of the Mirkwood picture was cut out and never restored, since my father afterwards gave the original to a Chinese student of his. It is never likely to be so. He twisted unhappily in the restriction to 2 colors for the maps. The change from blue to red on end paper 2, the Wilderland map, is detrimental, and wondered whether to substitute blue for red on Thror's map. Perhaps worst, and involving him in the most labour, was the dust jacket. As originally coloured, there was a red sun and a red dragon, a red title, and a red flush of the great central mountain that appears on the spine or shelf back. When my father sent it in April, he foresaw the objection that he had used too many colours, blue, green, red, and black. This could be met with possible improvement by substituting white for red and omitting the sun, or drawing a line round it. The presence of the sun and moon in the sky together refers to the magic attaching to the door. See page 53. We still call it Durin's Day, when the last moon of autumn and the sun are in the sky together. We would suggest removing the red, replied Charles Firth, both because the title will show up better in white, and because the only feature about which we are not entirely happy in the cover is the flush on the central mountain, which makes it to our eyes just a trifle like a cake. My father then redrew the jacket design. I've omitted the offending pink icing on the mountain cake, he wrote. It is now arranged in blue, black, green. The sun and dragon still have some red, which can be left out, in which case the sun will vanish or can have a thin black outline. The colours of the original draft were, I think, more attractive. I may say that my children, if they are anything to go by, much prefer the original, including the red flush on the central mountain, but possibly the cake suggestion is attractive to them. He argued still for red dragon, red sun, red title on the front cover and other details, but Charles Firth was firm. Alas, he wrote, that red will have to go. The sun in outline is my chief sorrow, my father wrote when he saw the final result, but I realize that it cannot be helped. The American edition had a different jacket because, as the publisher said, your jacket has a rather British look, which always seems to disconcert and depress our book trade. I'm delighted to learn that our jacket has a British look, he wrote, but I would not depress or disconcert the book trade for anything. 3 weeks after the publication of The Hobbit, Stanley Unwin wrote to my father saying that a large public would be clamoring next year to hear more from you about hobbits. In the course of his reply, the 15th of October 1937, he said, all the same, I am a little perturbed. I cannot think of anything more to say about hobbits. Mr. Baggins seems to have exhibited so fully both the Took and the Baggins side of their nature. But I have only too much to say, and much already written about the world into which the Hobbit intruded. You can, of course, see any of it and say what you like about it if and when you wish. I should rather like an opinion, other than that of Mr. C.S. Lewis and my children, whether it has any value in itself or is a marketable commodity other than hobbits. But it is true that the Hobbit has come to stay and more will be wanted. I will start the process of thought and try to get some idea of a theme drawn from this material for treatment in a similar style and for a similar audience, possibly including actual hobbits. My daughter would like something on the Duke family. One reader wants fuller details about Gandalf and the Necromancer, but that is too dark, much too dark for Richard Hughes' snag. Richard Hughes had written to Stanley Unwin about The Hobbit, saying, the only snag I can see is that many parents may be afraid that certain parts of it would be too terrifying for bedtime reading. I am afraid that snag appears in everything, though actually the presence, even if only on the borders of the terrible, is, I believe, what gives this world its imagined verisimilitude. A safe fairyland is untrue to all worlds. At the moment I am suffering like Mr. Baggins from a touch of staggerment, and I hope I am not taking myself too seriously, but I must confess that your letter has aroused in me a faint hope. I begin to wonder whether duty and desire may not perhaps in future go more closely together. I have spent nearly all the vacation times of 17 years examining and doing things of that sort, driven by immediate financial necessity, mainly medical and educational. Writing stories in prose or verse has been stolen, often guiltily, from time already mortgaged, and has been broken and ineffective. I may perhaps now do what I much desire to do and not fail on financial duty. Perhaps. The Silmarillion, the long unfinished poem The Lay of Leithian, concerned with one of the major stories of the elder days, and other things went to Allen and Unwin in November and were returned in the following month. In his accompanying letter of the 15th of December, Stanley Unwin, urging my father to write another book about the Hobbit, reported to him that the first edition is now sold out, and that we are expecting supplies of the reprint containing the 4 coloured illustrations almost immediately. The first impression had no pictures in colour. My father was pleased with the 4 coloured reproductions, but regretted that the eagle picture illustrating the first sentence of chapter 6, Queer Lodgings, had not been included, merely because I should have liked to see it reproduced. It was in fact included in the first American edition, which did not use Bilbo comes to the huts of the Raft Elves, and finally appeared in a British edition in 1978. If any of your friends want to make sure of their copies of the first edition, they had better buy them quickly from any bookseller who still has one in stock. On the 16th of December, he replied to Stanley Unwin, I did not think any of the stuff I dropped on you filled the bill. I think it is plain that quite apart from it, a sequel or successor to The Hobbit is called for. I promise to give this thought and attention. But I am sure you will sympathize when I say that the construction of elaborate and consistent mythology in 2 languages rather occupies the mind, and the Silmarils are in my heart. So that goodness knows what will happen. Mr. Baggins began as a comic tale among conventional and inconsistent Grimm's fairy-tale dwarfs, and got drawn into the edge of it, so that even Sauron the Terrible peeped over the edge. And what more can hobbits do? They can be comic, but their comedy is suburban unless it is set against things more elemental. 3 days later, he wrote to Charles Firth, I have written the first chapter of a new story about hobbits, a long-expected party. That was the first chapter of The Lord of the Rings, written by Christopher Tolkien in 1987, which is how we are moving on to the actual Hobbit. Let me first check if everything's okay. It seems to be. It seems to be. So, The Hobbit is a tale of high adventure undertaken by a company of dwarves in search of dragon-guarded gold. A reluctant partner in this perilous quest is Bilbo Baggins, a comfort-loving, unambitious hobbit who surprises even himself by his resourcefulness and his skill as a burglar. Encounters with trolls, goblins, dwarves, elves, and giant spiders, conversations with the dragon, Smaug the Magnificent, and a rather unwilling presence at the Battle of the Five Armies are some of the adventures that befall Bilbo. But there are lighter moments as well, good fellowship, welcome meals, laughter, and song. Bilbo Baggins has taken his place among the ranks of the immortals of children's fiction. Written for Professor Tolkien's own children, The Hobbit met with instant acclaim when published. It is a complete and marvelous tale in itself, but it also forms a prelude to The Lord of the Rings, one of the most influential books of our generation, said the Times. We shall skip the content, but we will read the note on the text. The Hobbit was first published in September 1937. Its 1951 second edition, fifth impression, contains a significantly revised portion of Chapter 5, Riddles in the Dark, which brings the story of The Hobbit more in line with its sequel, The Lord of the Rings, than in progress. Tolkien made some further revisions to the American edition published by Ballantine Books in February 1966 and to the British third edition, 16th impression, published by George Allen and Unwin later that same year. For the 1995 British hardcover edition published by HarperCollins, the text of The Hobbit was entered into word processing files and a number of further corrections of misprints and errors were made. Since then, various editions of The Hobbit have been generated from that computerized text file. For the present text, that file has been compared again line by line with the early editions, and a number of further corrections have been made to present a text that, as closely as possible represents Tolkien's final intended form. Readers interested in details of the changes made at various times to the text of The Hobbit are referred to Appendix A, Textual and Original Notes, or the Annotated Hobbit 1988, and J.R.R. Tolkien, a descriptive bibliography by Wayne G. Hammond, with the assistance of Douglas A. Anderson, 1993, by Douglas Anderson, May 2001. And then we have the map. My map is, well, it appears to be a bit bigger than this one, since mine is spread out across 2 pages, and this one appears to only be on half of it, I guess. But it's no matter. This is Thror's map, right? And we'll get back to it later. I will switch to the maps. This is a good time to mention that we are also using this map here from the Lord of the Rings project with maps, and we're mainly focusing here on well, the dwarves' paths, the path that the dwarves take in this book. We're going to go over some places here in this map because I am autistic about maps, I guess, something like that. Right, it should be okay here, I guess. Let's get back to reading then. This is a story of long ago. At that time, the languages and letters were quite different from ours of today. English is used to represent languages, but 2 points may be noted. 1. In English, the only correct plural of dwarf is dwarfs. and the adjective is dwarfish. In the story, dwarves and dwarvish are used. The reason for this use is given in the Lord of the Rings Appendix F, but only when speaking of the ancient people to whom Thorin Oakenshield and his companions belonged. 2. Orc is not an English word. It occurs in 1 or 2 places, but it is usually translated goblin or hobgoblin for the larger kinds. Orc is the Hobbit's form of the name, given at that time to these creatures, and it is not connected at all with our orc applied to sea animals of dolphin kind. Runes were old letters originally used for cutting or scratching on wood, stone, or metal, and so were thin and angular. At the time of this tale, only the dwarves made regular use of them, especially for private or secret records. Their runes are in this book represented by English runes, which are known now to few people. If the runes on Thror's map are compared with the transcriptions into modern letters on pages 21 and 52, the alphabet, adapted to modern English, can be discovered, and the above runic title also read. On the map, all the normal runes are found except this rune for X. I and U are used for J and V. There was no rune for Q, we use CW, nor for Z. The dwarf rune may be used if required, and you see which one. It will be found, however, that some single runes stand for 2 modern letters, TH and E and double E. Other runes of the same kind, EA and ST, were also sometimes used. The secret door was marked D, this symbol. From the side, a hand pointed to this, and under it was written, you can see a string of runes that was written. The last 2 runes are the initials of Thror and Troin. The moon runes read by Elrond were these. On the map, the compass points are marked in runes with east at the top, as usual in dwarf maps, and so read clockwise: east, south, west, and north. We can skip to the map again to see that. So those are the runes that we're going to be talking about. So east, I suppose clockwise, south, west, and north then. Yeah, right. So we're going to be coming from here, from the right part of the map to the left part of the map to the mountain. And you can see the river, the running river. This is the river upon which the city of Dale and then the long lake and the other city lies. This is where we'll be coming from. Chapter 1. An unexpected party. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. Not a nasty, dirty, wet hole, filled with the ends of worms and an oozy smell, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it to sit down on or to eat. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. It had a perfectly round door like a porthole, painted green, with a shiny yellow brass knob in the exact middle. The door opened onto a tube-shaped hall like a tunnel, a very comfortable tunnel without smoke, with panelled walls and floors tiled and carpeted, provided with polished chairs and lots of pegs for hats and coats. The hobbit was fond of visitors. The tunnel wound on and on, going fairly but not quite straight into the side of the hill. The hill, as all the people for many miles round called it, and many little round doors opened out of it, first on one side and then on another. No going upstairs for the hobbit. Bedrooms, bathrooms, cellars, pantries, lots of these. Wardrobes. He had whole rooms devoted to clothes. Kitchens, dining rooms, all were on the same floor, and indeed on the same passage. The best rooms were all on the left-hand side going in, for these were the only ones to have windows, deep-set round windows looking over his garden, and meadows beyond, sloping down to the river. This hobbit was a very well-to-do hobbit, and his name was Baggins. The Bagginses had lived in the neighbourhood of the hill for time out of mind, and people considered them very respectable, not only because most of them were rich, but also because they never had any adventures or did anything unexpected. You could tell what a Baggins would say on any question without the bother of asking him. This is a story of how a Baggins had an adventure and found himself doing insane things altogether unexpected. He may have lost his neighbour's respect, but he gained, well, you will see whether he gained anything in the end. The mother of our particular hobbit? What is a hobbit? I suppose hobbits need some description nowadays, since they have become rare and shy of the big people, as they call us. They are, or were, a little people, about half our height, and smaller than the bearded dwarves. Hobbits have no beards. There is little or no magic around about them, except the ordinary everyday sort which helps them to disappear quietly and quickly when large stupid folk like you and me come blundering along, making a noise like elephants which they can hear a mile off. They are inclined to be fat in the stomach. They dress in bright colours, chiefly green and yellow, wear no shoes because their feet grow naturally leathery soles, and thick warm brown hair like the stuff on their heads, which is curly, have long clever brown fingers, good-natured faces, and laugh deep fruity laughs, especially after dinner, which they have twice a day when they can get it. Now you know enough to go on with. As I was saying, the mother of this hobbit, Bilbo Baggins that is, was the famous Belladonna Took, one of the 3 remarkable daughters of the old Duke, head of the hobbits, who lived across the water, the small river that ran at the foot of the hill. It was often said in other families that long ago one of the Took ancestors must have taken a fairy wife. That was, of course, absurd, but certainly there was still something not entirely hobbit-like about them, and once in a while members of the Took clan would go and have adventures. They discreetly disappeared, and the family hushed it up, but the fact remained that the Tooks were not as respectable as the Bagginses, though they were undoubtedly richer. Not that Belladonna Took ever had any adventures after she became Mrs. Bungo Baggins. Bungo, that was Bilbo's father, built the most luxurious hobbit hole for her, and partly with her money, that was to be found either under the hill or over the hill or across the water, and there they remained to the end of their days. Still, it is probable that Bilbo, her only son, although he looked and behaved exactly like a second edition of his solid and comfortable father, got something a bit queer in his make-up from the Took side, something that only waited for a chance to come out. The chance never arrived until Bilbo Baggins was grown up, being about 50 years old or so, and living in the beautiful hobbit hole built by his father, which I have just described for you, until he had, in fact, apparently settled down immovably. By some curious chance, one morning long ago, in the quiet of the world, when there was less noise and more green, and the hobbits were still numerous and prosperous, and Bilbo Baggins was standing at his door after breakfast, smoking an enormous long wooden pipe that reached nearly down to his woolly toes, neatly brushed, Gandalf came by. Gandalf, if you had heard only a quarter of what I have heard about him, and I have only heard very little of all there is to hear, you would be prepared for any sort of remarkable tale. Tales and adventures sprouted up all over the place wherever he went in the most extraordinary fashion. He had not been down that way under the hill for ages and ages, not since his friend the old Took died, in fact, and the hobbits had almost forgotten what he looked like. He had been away over the hill and across the water on businesses of his own, since they were all small hobbit boys and hobbit girls. All that the unsuspecting Bilbo saw that morning was an old man with a staff. He had a tall, pointed blue hat, a long grey cloak, a silver scarf over which his long white beard hung down below his waist, and immense black boots. "Good morning," said Bilbo, and he meant it. The sun was shining, and the grass was very green, but Gandalf looked at him from under long bushy eyebrows that stuck out further than the brim of his shady hat. "What do you mean?" he said. "Do you wish me a good morning, or mean that it is a good morning whether I want it or not, or that you feel good this morning, or that it is a morning to be good on?" "All of them at once," said Bilbo. "And a very fine morning for a pipe of tobacco out of doors into the bargain. If you have a pipe about you, sit down and have a fill of mine. There's no hurry. We have all the day before us." Then Bilbo sat down on a seat by his door, crossed his legs, and blew out a beautiful grey ring of smoke that sailed up into the air without breaking and floated away over the hill. "Very pretty," said Gandalf, "but I have no time to blow smoke rings that morning. This morning I am looking for someone to share in an adventure that I am arranging, and it's very difficult to find anyone." "I should think so. In this parts we are plain quiet folk and have no use for adventures. Nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things. Make you late for dinner. Can't think that anybody sees in them," said old Mr. Beggins, and stuck one thumb behind his braces and blew out another, even bigger smoke ring. Then he took out his morning letters and began to read, pretending to take no more notice of the old man. He had decided that he was not quite his sort and wanted him to go away, but the old man did not move. He stood leaning on his stick and gazing at the Hobbit without saying anything, till Bilbo got quite uncomfortable and even a little cross. "Good morning," he said at last. "We don't want any adventures here, thank you. You might try over the hill or across the water." By this he meant that the conversation was at an end. "What a lot of things do you use good morning for?" said Gandalf. "Now you mean that you want to get rid of me, and that it won't be good till I moved off." Not at all, my dear sir. Let me see, I don't think I know your name." Yes, my dear sir, and I do know your name, Mr. Bilbo Baggins, and you do know my name, though you don't remember that I belong to it. I am Gandalf, and Gandalf means me. To think that I should have lived to be good morning by belladonna to be sung as if I was selling buttons at the door." Gandalf, good gracious me! Not the wandering wizard that gave old Took a pair of magic diamond studs that fastened themselves and never came undone till ordered? Not the fellow who used to tell such wonderful tales at parties about dragons and goblins and giants and the rescue of princesses and the unexpected luck of widows' sons? Not the man that used to make such particularly excellent fireworks? I remember those. Old Took used to have them on Midsummer's Eve. Splendid! They used to go up like great lilies and snapdragons and Lebanons of fire and hang in the twilight all evening. You will notice already that Mr. Baggins was not quite so prosy as he liked to believe, also that he was very fond of flowers. "Dear me," he went on, "not the Gandalf who was responsible for so many quiet lads and lassies going off into the blue for mad adventures? Anything from climbing trees to visiting elves or sailing in ships, sailing to other shores. Bless me, life used to be quite you used to upset things badly in these parts once upon a time. I beg your pardon, I had no idea you were still in business." "Where else should I be?" said the wizard. "All the same, I am pleased to find you remember something about me. You seem to remember my fireworks kindly at any rate, and that is not without hope. Indeed, for your old grandfather Took's sake, and for the sake of poor Belladonna, I will give you what you asked for." "I beg your pardon. I haven't asked for anything." "Yes, you have, twice now. My pardon, I give it to you. In fact, I will go so far as to send you on this adventure. Very amusing for me, very good for you, and profitable too, very likely if you ever get over it." "Sorry, I don't want any adventures, thank you, not today. Good morning, but please come to tea any time you like. Why not tomorrow? Come tomorrow. Goodbye." With that the Hobbit turned and scuttled inside his round green door and shut it as quickly as he dared, not to seem rude. Wizards, after all, are wizards. "What on earth did I ask him to tea for?" he said to himself as he went to the pantry. He had only just had breakfast, but he thought a cake or two and a drink of something would do him good after his fright. Gandalf, in the meantime, was still standing outside the door and laughing long but quietly. After a while he stepped up and with the spike of his staff scratched a queer sign on the Hobbit's beautiful green front door. Then he strode away, just about the time when Bilbo was finishing his second cake and beginning to think that he had escaped adventures very well. The next day he had almost forgotten about Gandalf. He did not remember things very well unless he put them down on his engagement tablet like this: Gandalf Tea Wednesday. Yesterday he had been too flustered to do anything of the kind. Just before tea time there came a tremendous ring on the front door bell, and then he remembered. He rushed and put on the kettle and put out another cup and saucer and an extra cake or two and ran to the door. "I am so sorry to keep you waiting," he was going to say, but when he saw that it was not Gandalf at all, it was a dwarf with a blue beard tucked into a golden belt and very bright eyes under his dark green hood. As soon as the door was opened, he pushed inside, just as if he had been expected. He hung his hooded cloak on the nearest peg, and "Dwalin, at your service," he said with a low bow. "Bilbo Baggins, at yours," said the Hobbit, too surprised to ask any questions for the moment. When the silence that followed had become uncomfortable, he added, "I am just about to take tea. Pray come and have some with me." A little stiff, perhaps, but he meant it kindly. "And what would you do if an uninvited dwarf came and hung his things up in your hall without a word of explanation?" They had not been at table long. In fact, they had hardly reached the third cake when there came another, even louder ring at the bell. "Excuse me," said the Hobbit, and off he went to the door. "So you have got here at last!" That was what he was going to say to Gandalf this time, but it was not Gandalf. Instead, there was a very old-looking dwarf on the step with a white beard and a scarlet hood, and he, too, hopped inside as soon as the door was open, just as if he had been invited. "I see they have begun to arrive already," he said when he caught sight of Dwalin's green hood hanging up. He hung his red one next to it, and "Balin, at your service," he said with his hand on his breast. "Thank you," said Bilbo with a gasp. It was not the correct thing to say, but "they have begun to arrive" had flustered him badly. He liked visitors, but he liked to know them before they arrived, and he preferred to ask them himself. He had a horrible thought that the cakes might run short, and then he, as the host, he knew his duty and stuck to it, however painful he might have to go without. "Come along in and have some tea," he managed to say after taking a deep breath. "A little beer would suit me better, but if it is all the same to you, my good sir," said Balin with the white beard. "But I don't mind some cake, seed cake if you have any." "Lots?" Bilbo found himself answering, to his own surprise, and he found himself scuttling off, too, to the cellar, to fill a pint beer mug, and then to a pantry, to fetch 2 beautiful round seed cakes which he had baked that afternoon for his after-supper morsel. When he got back, Balin and Dwalin were talking at the table like old friends. As a matter of fact, they were brothers. Bilbo plumped down the beer and the cake in front of them, when loud came a ring at the bell again, and then another ring. Gandalf was certain this time, he thought, as he puffed along the passage, but it was not. It was 2 more dwarves, both with blue hoods, silver belts, and yellow beards, and each of them carried a bag of tools and a spade. In they hopped as soon as the door began to open. Bilbo was hardly surprised at all. "What can I do for you, my dwarves?" he said. "Kili, at your service," said the one. "And Fili," added the other, and they both swept off their blue hoods and bowed. "At yours and your families," replied Bilbo, remembering his manners this time. "Dwalin and Balin here already, I see," said Kili. "Let us join the throng." "Throng?" thought Mr. Baggins. "I don't like the sound of that. I really must sit down for a minute and collect my wits and have a drink." He had only just had a sip in the corner while the 4 dwarves sat round the table and talked about mines and gold and troubles with the goblins and the depredations of dragons and lots of other things which he did not understand and did not want to, for they sounded much too adventurous, when ding-dong-a-ling-dong, his bell rang again, as if some naughty little hobbit boy was trying to pull the handle off. "Someone at the door," he said, blinking. "Some four, I should say, by the sound," said Philly. "Besides, we saw them coming along behind us in the distance." The poor little hobbit sat down in the hall and put his head in his hands and wondered what had happened and what was going to happen and whether they would all stay to supper. Then the bell rang again, louder than ever, and he had to run to the door. It was not 4 after all, it was 5. Another dwarf had come along while he was wandering in the hall. He had hardly turned the knob before they were all inside, bowing and saying, "At your service," one after another. Dori, Nori, Ori, Oin, and Gloin were their names. And very soon 2 purple hoods, a grey hood, a brown hood, and a white hood were hanging on the pegs, and off they marched, with their broad hands stuck in their gold and silver belts, to join the others. Already it had almost become a throng. Some called for ale, and some for porter, and one for coffee, and all of them for cakes, so the hobbit was kept very busy for a while. A big jug of coffee had just been set in the hearth, the seed cakes were gone, and the dwarfs were starting on a round of buttered scones, when there came a loud knock. Not a ring, but a hard rat-tat on the hobbit's beautiful green door. Somebody was banging with a stick. Bilbo rushed along the passage, very angry and altogether bewildered and bewildered. This was the most awkward Wednesday he ever remembered. He pulled open the door with a jerk, and they all fell in, one on top of the other. More dwarfs, 4 more, and there was Gandalf behind, leaning on his staff and laughing. He had made quite a dent on the beautiful door. He had also, by the way, knocked out the streak mark that he had put there the morning before. "Carefully, carefully," he said. "It is not like you, Bilbo, to keep friends waiting on the mat, and then open the door like a pop gun. Let me introduce Bifur, Bofur, Bombur, and especially Thorin." "At your service," said Bifur, Bofur, and Bombur, standing in a row. Then they hung up 2 yellow hoods and a pale green one, and also a sky blue one with a long silver tassel. This last belonged to Thorin, an enormously important dwarf, in fact no other than the great Thorin Oakenshield himself, who was not at all pleased at falling flat on Bilbo's mat with Bifur, Bofur, and Bombur on top of him. For one thing, Bombur was immensely fat and heavy. Thorin indeed was very haughty and said nothing about service, but poor Mr. Baggins said he was sorry so many times that at last he grunted, "Pray don't mention it," and stopped frowning. "Now we are all here," said Gandalf, looking at the row of 13 hoods, the best detachable party hoods, and his own hat hanging on the pegs. "Quite a merry gathering. I hope there is something left for the latecomers to eat and drink." "What's that? Tea? No, thank you. A little red wine, I think, for me." "And for me," said Thorin. "And raspberry jam and apple tart," said Bifur. "And mince pies and cheese," said Bofur. "And pork pie and salad," said Bombur. "And more cakes, and ale, and coffee, if you don't mind," called the other dwarfs through the door. "Put in a few eggs, there's a good fellow," Gandalf called after him, as the hobbit stumped off to the pantries. "And just bring out the cold chicken and pickles." "Seems to know as much about the inside of my lard as I do myself," thought Mr. Baggins, who was feeling positively flummoxed, and was beginning to wonder whether a most wretched adventure had not come right into his house. By the time he had got all the bottles and dishes and knives and forks and glasses and plates and spoons and things piled up on big trays, he was getting very hot and red in the face and annoyed. "Confiscate and bother these dwarfs," he said aloud. "Why don't they come and lend a hand? Lo and behold, there stood Balin and Dwalin at the door of the kitchen, and Phil and Kelly behind them, and before he could say knife, they had whisked the trays and a couple of small tables into the parlour and set out everything afresh." Gandalf sat at the head of the party with the 13 dwarfs all round, and Bilbo sat on a stool at the fireside, nibbling at a biscuit. His appetite was quite taken away, and trying to look as if this was all perfectly ordinary and not in the least an adventure. The dwarfs ate, and talked, and time got on. At last they pushed their chairs back, and Bilbo made a move to collect the plates and glasses. "Suppose you will all stay to supper," he said in his politest, unpressing tones. "Of course," said Thorin, "and after. Shan't get through the business till late, and we must have some music first. Now to clear up." Thereupon the 12 dwarfs, not Thorin, he was too important and stayed talking to Gandalf, jumped to their feet and made tall piles of all the things. Off they went, not waiting for trays, balancing columns of plates, each with a bottle on the top, with one hand, while the hobbit ran after them almost squeaking with fright. Please be careful, and please don't trouble. I can manage, but the dwarfs only started to sing. Chip the glasses and crack the plates, blunt the knives and bend the forks. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. Smash the bottles and burn the corks. Cut the cloth and tread on the fat. Pour the milk on the pantry floor. Leave the bones on the bedroom mat. Splash the wine on every door. I really love that song. It's wonderful. It is very different in the movie, but it is wonderful. Dump the crocks in a boiling ball, pound them up with a thumping pole, and when you're finished, if they are whole, send them down the hole to roll. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates, so carefully with the plates. And of course, they did none of these dreadful things, and everything was cleaned and put away safe as quick as lightning, while the hobbit was turning round and round in the middle of the kitchen trying to see what they were doing. Then they went back and found Thorin with his feet on the fender, smoking a pipe. He was blowing the most enormous smoke rings, and wherever he told one to go, it went. Up the chimney, or behind the clock on the mantelpiece, or under the table, or round and round the ceiling. But wherever it went, it was not quick enough to escape Gandalf. Pop! He sent a smaller smoke ring from his short clay pipe straight through each one of Thorin's. Then Gandalf's smoke ring would go green and come back to hover over the wizard's head. He had a cloud of them above him already, and in the dim light it made him look strange and sorcerous. Bilbo stood still and watched. He loved smoke rings. And then he blushed to think how proud he had been yesterday morning of the smoke rings he had sent up the wind over the hill. "Now for some music," said Thorin. "Bring out the instruments." Killy and Filly rushed for their bags and brought back little fiddles. Dori, Nori, and Ori brought out flutes from somewhere inside their coats. Bombur produced a drum from the hall. Bifur and Bofur went out too and came back with clarinets that they had left among the walking sticks. Dwalin and Balin said, "Excuse me, I left mine in the porch." "Just bring mine in with you," said Thorin. They came back with vials as big as themselves, and with Thorin's harp wrapped in a green cloth. It was a beautiful golden harp, and when Thorin struck it, the music began all at once, so sudden and sweet that Bilbo forgot everything else, was swept away into the dark lands under strange moons, far over the water, and very far from this hobbit hole under the hill. The dark came into the room from the little window that opened in the side of the hill. The firelight flickered. It was April, and still they played on, while the shadow of Gandalf's beard wagged against the wall. The dark filled all the room, and the fire died down, and the shadows were lost, and still they played on. And suddenly, first one and then another began to sing as they played, deep-throated singing of the dwarves in the deep places of their ancient homes. And this is like a fragment of their song, if it can be like their song without their music. Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day, to seek the pale enchanted gold. The dwarfs of yore made mighty spells, while hammers fell like ringing bells in places deep where dark things sleep, in hollows beneath the fells. For ancient kings
and elvish lord. Their many gleaming golden hoard they shaped and wrought, and light they caught to hide in gems on hilt of sword. On silver necklaces they strung the Florent stars, on crowns they hung the dragon fire in twisted wire. They meshed the light of moon and sun. Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day, to claim our long forgotten gold. Goblets they carved there for themselves, and harps of gold where no man dwells. There lay they long, and many a song was sung unheard by man or else. The pines were roaring on the height, the winds were mourning in the night. The fire was red, its flaming spread. The trees like torches blazed with light. The bells were ringing in the dale, and men looked up with faces pale. The dragon's eye, more fierce than fire, laid low their towers and houses frail. The mountain smoked beneath the moon. The dwarfs they heard the tramp of doom. They fled their home to die in fall beneath his feet, beneath the moon. Far over the misty mountains green, to dungeons deep and caverns deep, we must away ere break of day, to win our harps and gold from him.
As they sang, the hobbit felt the love of beautiful things made by hands and by cunning and by magic moving through him. This and jealous love, the desire of the hearts of dwarves. Then something Turkish woke up inside him, and he wished to go and see the great mountains and hear the pine trees and the waterfalls, and explore the caves, and wear a sword instead of a walking stick. He looked out of the window. The stars were out in a dark sky above the trees. He thought of the jewels of the dwarfs shining in dark caverns. Suddenly, in the wood beyond the water, a flame leapt up. Probably somebody lighting a wood fire, and he thought of plundering dragons settling on his quiet hill and kindling it to flames. He shuddered, and very quickly he was playing Mr. Baggins of Bag End Underhill again. He got up trembling. He had less than half a mind to fetch the lamp, and more than half a mind to pretend to, and go and hide behind the beer barrels in the cellar, and not come out again until all the dwarfs had gone away. Suddenly he found that the music and the singing had stopped, and they were all looking at him with eyes shining in the dark. "Where are you going?" said Thorin, in a tone that seemed to show that he guessed both halves of the hobbit's mind. "What about a little light?" said Bilbo apologetically. "We like the dark," said all the dwarfs. "Dark for dark business. There are many hours before the dawn." "Well, of course," said Bilbo, and sat down in a hurry. He missed the stool and sat in the fender, knocking over the poker and shovel with a crash. "Hush!" said Gandalf. "Let Thorin speak." This is how Thorin began. "Gandalf, dwarves, and Mr. Baggins, we are met together in the house of our friend and fellow conspirator, this most excellent and audacious hobbit. May the hair on his toes never fall out. All praise to his wine and ale." He paused for breath and for a polite remark from the hobbit, but the compliments were quite lost on poor Bilbo Baggins, who was wagging his mouth in protest at being called audacious and, worst of all, fellow conspirator, though no noise came out. He was so flummoxed. So Thorin went on. "We are met to discuss our plans, our ways, means, policy, and devices. We shall soon before the break of day start on our long journey, a journey from which some of us, or perhaps all of us except our friend and counselor, the ingenious wizard Gandalf, may never return. It is a solemn moment. Our object is, I take it, well known to us all. To the estimable Mr. Baggins, and perhaps to one or two of the younger dwarfs, I think I should be right in naming Killy and Philly, for instance. The exact situation at the moment may require a little brief explanation." This was Thorin's style. He was an important dwarf. If he had been allowed, he would probably have gone on like this until he was out of breath, without telling anyone there anything that was not known already. But he was rudely interrupted. Poor Bilbo couldn't bear it any longer. It may never return. He began to feel a shriek coming up inside, and very soon it burst out like the whistle of an angel coming out of a tunnel. All the dwarfs sprang up, knocking over the table. Gandalf struck a blue light on the end of his magic staff, and in its firework glare the poor little hobbit could be seen kneeling on the hearthrug, shaking like a jelly that was melting. Then he fell flat on the floor and kept on calling out, "Struck by lightning! Struck by lightning!" over and over again, and that was all they could get out of him for a long time. So they took him and laid him out of the way on the drawing-room sofa with a drink at his elbow, and they went back to their dark business. "Excitable little fellow," said Gandalf, as they sat down again. "Gets funny, queer fits. But he is one of the best, and one of the best as fierce as a dragon in a pinch. If you have ever seen a dragon in a pinch, you will realize that this was only poetical exaggeration applied to any hobbit. Even to old Took's great-grand-uncle, Bullroarer, who was so huge for a hobbit that he could ride a horse. He charged the ranks of the goblins of Mount Graham in the Battle of the Green Fields, and knocked their king Galfimble's head clean off with a wooden club. It held 100 yards through the air and went down a rabbit hole, and in this way the battle was won and the game of golf invented at the same moment. In the meantime, however, Bullroarer's gentler descendant was reviving in the drawing-room. After a while and a drink, he crept nervously to the door of the parlour. This is what he heard Glóin speaking. Awesome.
snort, more or less like that. Will it do? Do you think? It is all very well for Gandalf to talk about this hobbit being fierce, but one shriek like that in a moment of excitement would be enough to wake the dragon and all his relatives and kill the lot of us. I think it sounded more like fright than excitement. In fact, if it had not been for the sign on the door, I should have been sure we had come to the wrong house. As soon as I clapped eyes on the little fellow bobbing and puffing on the map, I had my doubts. He looks more like a grocer than a burglar. Then Mr. Baggins turned the handle and went in. The Tookside had won. He suddenly felt he would go without bed and breakfast to be thought fierce. As for little fellow bobbing on the map, it almost made him really fierce. Many a time afterwards the Baggins part regretted what he did now, and he said to himself, "Bilbo, you were a fool. You walked right in and put your foot in it." "Pardon me," he said, "if I have overheard words that you were saying. I don't pretend to understand that you are talking about, or your reference to burglars, but I think I am right in believing, this is what he called being on his dignity. Do you think I am no good? I will show you. I have no signs on my door. It was painted a week ago, and I am quite sure you have come to the wrong house. As soon as I saw your funny faces on the doorstep, I had my doubts, but treat it as the right one. Tell me what you want done, and I will try it. If I have to walk from here to the east-west and fight the wild bear-worms in the last desert. I had a great-great-great-granduncle once, Borora a Took, and—" Yes, but that was long ago," said Gloin. "I was talking about you. I assure you there is a mark on this door, the usual one in the trade, or used to be. Burglar wants a good job, plenty of excitement and reasonable reward. That's how it is usually read. You can say expert treasure hunter instead of burglar if you want. Some of them do. It's all the same to us. Gandalf told us that there was a man of the sort in these parts looking for a job at once, that he had arranged for a meeting here this Wednesday tea time." "Of course there is a mark," said Gandalf. "I put it there myself, for very good reasons. You asked me to find the 14th man for your expedition, and I chose Mr. Baggins. Just let anyone say I chose the wrong man or the wrong house, and you can stop at 13 and have all the bad luck you like, or go back to digging coal." He scowled so angrily at Gloin that the dwarf huddled back in his chair, and when Bilbo tried to open his mouth to ask a question, he turned and frowned at him and stuck out his bushy eyebrows till Bilbo shut his mouth tight with a snap. "That's right," said Gandalf. "Let's have no more argument. I have chosen Mr. Baggins, and that ought to be enough for all of you. If I say he's a burglar he is or will be when time comes. There is a lot more in him than you guess, and a deal more than he has any idea of himself. You may possibly all live to thank me yet. Now, Bilbo, my boy, fetch the lamp and let's have a little light on this." On the table in the light of a big lamp with a red shade he spread a piece of parchment, rather like a map. "This was made by Thror, your grandfather, Thorin," he said in answer to the dwarf's excited questions. "It is a plan of the mountain." "I don't see that this will help us much," said Thorin disappointedly after a glance. "I remember the mountain well enough and the lands about it, and I know where Mirkwood is and the Wizard Heath, where the great dragons bred." "There is a dragon marked in red in the mountain," said Balin. "It will be easy enough to find him without that if we arrive there." "There is one point that you haven't noticed," said the wizard, "and that is the secret entrance. You see that rune on the west side and the hand pointing to it from the other runes? That marks a hidden passage to the lower halls. Let's look at the map, actually, to see those runes, shall we? Let me quickly... Oh, and I just opened the chat. I am not reading and painting simultaneously. You can see the Telegram channel in the text. This is who's painting, not me. I'm reading, she's painting right next to me. So the map is it. Where shall we find it?
Let me see. Ah, here it is. Didn't actually think about capturing the map of Thror here. Should have done that beforehand. Is it this one? Yes. Oh, goodness gracious. I will put it instead of the map, I suppose. Here. Map. Jesus Christ, there are a lot of maps here, aren't there? Right. So this map here. Jesus. That's quite difficult to manage. Righty. This should look fine, right? Okay, moving on. So, the map that marks a hidden passage to the lower halls. May have been secret once, said Thorin, but how do we know that it is secret any longer? Old Smaug has lived there long enough not to find out anything there is to know about those caves. He may, but he can't have used it for years and years. Why? Because it's too small. 5 feet high the door, and 3 may walk abreast, say the runes, but Smaug could not creep into a hole that size, not even when he was a young dragon, certainly not after devouring so many of the dwarves and men of Dale. It seems a great big hole to me, squeaked Bilbo, who had no experience of dragons and only of hobbit holes. He was getting excited and interested again, so that he forgot to keep his mouth shut. He loved maps, and in his hall there hung a large one of the country round, with all his favourite walks marked on it in red ink. How could such a large door be kept secret from everybody outside, apart from the dragon? He asked. He was only a little hobbit, you must remember. In lots of ways, said Gandalf, but in what way this one has been hidden we don't know without going to see. From what it says on the map, I should guess there is a closed door, which has been made to look exactly like the side of the mountain. That is the usual dwarves' method. I think that is right, isn't it? Quite right, said Thorin. Also, went on Gandalf, I forgot to mention that with the map went a key, a small and curious key. Here it is, he said, and handed to Thorin a key with a long barrel and intricate wards made of silver. Keep it safe. Indeed I will, said Thorin, and he fastened it upon fine chain. Just a moment. A fine chain that hung about his neck and under his jacket. Now things will begin to look more hopeful. This news alters them much for the better. So far, we have had no clear idea what to do. We thought of going east, as quiet and careful as we could, as far as the long lake. After that, the trouble would begin. A long time before that, if I know anything about the roads east, interrupted Gandalf. We might go from there up along the river running, went on Thorin, taking no notice, and so to the ruins of Dale, the old town and the valley there under the shadow of the mountain. We none of us liked the idea of the front gate. The river runs right out of it through the great cliff at the south of the mountain, and out of it comes the dragon too, far too often, unless he has changed his habits. That would be no good, said the wizard, not without a mighty warrior, or even a hero. I tried to find one, but warriors are busy fighting one another in distant lands, and in this neighborhood heroes are scarce, or simply not to be found. Swords in these parts are mostly blunt, and axes are used for trees and shields as cradles or dish covers, and dragons are comfortably far off.
and therefore legendary. That is why I settled on burglary, especially when I remembered the existence of a side door. And here is our little Bilbo Baggins, the burglar, the chosen and selected burglar. So now let's get on and make some plans. Very well then, said Thorin. Supposing the burglar expert gives us some ideas or suggestions. He turned with mock politeness to Bilbo. But first, I should like to know a bit more about things, said he, feeling all confused and a bit shaky inside, but so far still tookishly determined to go on with things. I mean about the gold and the dragon and all that, and how it got there, and who it belongs to, and so on and further. Bless me, said Thorin. Haven't you got a map? And did you hear our song? Haven't we been talking about all this for hours? All the same, I should like it all plain and clear, said he obstinately, putting on his business manner, usually reserved for people who tried to borrow money of him, and doing his best to appear wise and prudent and professional and live up to Gandalf's recommendation. Also, I should like to know about risks, out-of-pocket expenses, time required, and remuneration and so forth, by which he meant, what am I going to get out of it? And am I going to come back alive? Oh, very well, said Thorin. Long ago, my grandfather Thror's time, family was driven out of the far north and came back with all their wealth and their tools to this mountain on the map. It had been discovered by my far ancestor Thrain the Old, but now they mined and they tunneled and they made huger holes and greater workshops. In addition, I believe they found a good deal of gold and a great many jewels too. Anyway, they grew immensely rich and famous, and my grandfather was king under the mountain again, and treated with great reverence by the mortal men who lived to the south and were gradually spreading up the running river as far as the valley overshadowed by the mountain. They built the merry town of Dale there in those days. Kings used to send for our smiths and reward even the least skilful most richly. Fathers would beg us to take their sons as apprentices and pay us handsomely, especially in food supplies, which we never bothered to grow or find for ourselves. Altogether, those were good days for us, and the poorest of us had money to spend and to lend, and leisure to make beautiful things just for the fun of it, not to speak of the most marvelous and magical toys, the like of which is not to be found in the world nowadays. So my grandfather's halls became full of armor and jewels and carvings and cups, and the toy market of Dale was the wonder of the north. Undoubtedly, that was what brought the dragon. Dragons steal gold and jewels, from men and elves and dwarves, wherever they can find them. They guard, they plunder, as long as they live, which is practically forever, unless they are killed. Never enjoy a brass ring of it. Indeed, they hardly know a good bit of work from a bad, though they usually have a good notion for the current market value, and they can't make a thing for themselves, not even mend a little loose scale of their armor. There were lots of dragons in the north in those days, and gold was probably getting scarce up there, with the dwarves flying south or getting killed, and all the general waste and destruction that dragons make going from bad to worse. There was a most specially greedy, strong, and wicked worm called Smaug. One day he flew up into the air and came south. The first we heard of it was a noise, like a hurricane coming from the north, and the pine trees on the mountain creaking and cracking in the wind. Some of the dwarves who happened to be outside, I was one, luckily, a fine adventurous lad in those days, always wandering about, and it saved my life that day. Well, from a good way off we saw the dragon settle on our mountain in a spout of flame. Then he came down the slopes, and when he reached the woods they all went up in the fire. By that time all the bells were ringing in Dale, and the warriors were arming. The dwarves rushed out their great gate, but there was the dragon waiting for them. None escaped that day. The river rushed up in steam, and a fog fell on Dale, and in the fog the dragon came on them and destroyed most of the warriors. The usual unhappy story, it was only too common in those days. Then he went back and crept in through the front gate and routed out all the halls and lanes and tunnels, alleys, cellars, mansions, and passages. After that, there were no dwarves left alive inside, and he took all their wealth for himself. Probably for that is the dragon's way. He has piled it all up in a great heap far inside and sleeps on it for a bed. Later, he used to crawl out the great gate and come by night to Dale and carry away people, especially maidens, to eat, until Dale was ruined and all the people dead or gone. What goes on there now, I don't know for certain. I don't suppose anyone lives near the mountain and the far edge of the long lake nowadays. The few of us that were well outside sat and wept in hiding, and cursed Smaug, and there we were, unexpectedly joined by my father and my grandfather with singed beards. They looked very grim, but said very little. When I asked how they had got away, they told me to hold my tongue, and said that one day, in the proper time, I should know. After that, we went away, and we have had to earn our livings as best we could, up and down the lands, often enough sinking as low as blacksmith work or even coal mining. But you have never forgotten our stolen treasure. But even now, and I will allow we have a good bit laid by and are not so badly off. Here Thorin stroked the gold chain round his neck. We still mean to get it back and to bring our curses home to Smaug if we can. I have often wondered about my father's and my grandfather's escape. I see now they must have had a private side door which only they knew about. But apparently they made a map, and I should like to know how Gandalf got hold of it and why it did not come down to me, the rightful heir. I did not get hold of it. I was given it, said the wizard. Your grandfather Thror was killed, you remember, in the mines of Moria by Azog the Goblin. Curse his name, yes, said Thorin. And Thrain, your father, went away on the 21st of April, 100 years ago last Thursday, and has never been seen by you since. True, said Thorin. Well, your father gave me this to give to you, and if I have chosen my own time and way for handing it over, you can hardly blame me, considering the trouble I had to find you. Your father could not remember his own name when he gave me the paper, and he never told me yours, so on the whole I think I ought to be praised and thanked. Here it is, said he, handing the map to Thorin. I don't understand, said Thorin, and Bilbo felt he would have liked to say the same. The explanation did not seem to explain. Your grandfather, said the wizard slowly and grimly, gave the map to his son for safety before he went to the mines of Moria. Your father went away to try his luck with the map after your grandfather was killed, and lots of adventures of a most unpleasant sort he had, but he never got near the mountain. How he got there I don't know, but I found him a prisoner in the dungeons of the necromancer. Whatever were you doing there? Asked Thorin with a shudder, and all the dwarfs shivered. Never you mind, I was finding things out as usual, and a nasty, dangerous business it was. Even I, Gandalf, only just escaped. I tried to save your father, but it was too late. He was witless and wandering. He had forgotten almost everything except the map and the key. We have long ago paid the goblins of Moria, said Thorin. We must give a thought to the necromancer. Don't be absurd. He is an enemy far beyond the powers of all the dwarfs put together, if they could all be collected again from the four corners of the world. The one thing your father wished for was for his son to read the map and use the key. The dragon and the mountain are more than big enough tasks for you. Hear, hear, said Bilbo, and accidentally said it aloud. Hear what? They all said, turning suddenly towards him, and he was so flustered that he answered, Hear what I have to say. What's that? They asked. Well, I should say that you ought to go east and have a look round. After all, there is the side door, and dragons must sleep sometimes, I suppose. If you sit on the doorstep long enough, I dare say you will think of something. And well, I don't you know, I think we have talked long enough for one night, if you see what I mean. What about bed? and an early start and all that. I'll give you a good breakfast before you go."
"Before we go, I suppose you mean," said Thorin. "Aren't you the burglar? It isn't sitting on the doorstep your job, not to speak of getting inside the door. But I agree about bed and breakfast. I like 6 eggs with my ham when starting on a journey. Fried, not poached, and mind you don't break them."
After all the others had ordered their breakfasts without so much as a please, which annoyed Bilbo very much, they all got up. The Hobbit had to find room for them all, and filled all his spare rooms, and made beds on chairs and sofas before he got them all stowed, and went to his own little bed, very tired and not altogether happy. One thing he did make his mind up about was not to bother to get up very early and cook everybody else's wretched breakfast. The tookishness was wearing off, and he was not now quite so sure that he was going on any journey in the morning. As he lay in bed, he could hear Thorin still humming to himself in the best bedroom next to him.
"Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day, to find our long forgotten gold."
Bilbo went to sleep with that in his ears, and it gave him very uncomfortable dreams. It was long after the break of day when he woke up.
Well, that was quite the chapter.
Honestly, Jesus Christ, that was very long. How long did it take? Like an hour and 40 minutes? That is insane. Well, I mean, an hour 30 minutes probably. I don't think I have the words about me to read another chapter. That would be too long. So that is probably the end. I think I will upload the video later on. But for now, well, thank you for watching and for joining and everything else. Have a good night.